What's up, guys? My name is Quincy Carrier, and this is Q&A, the show where I take your questions from YouTube and Twitter and answer them here on the show. And this week, before I was even able to post onto Twitter, there was a high amount of questions that were on YouTube, so I want to make sure I can hit all of those. So I only took questions from YouTube this week. Next week, I'll be taking questions from both platforms. But we had a ton of questions from YouTube, and I wanted to get to as many as them as possible in this current format of the show. So we're just going to jump into the questions right now. And the first question comes from John F., who says, how do you feel about that report from Schefter that the Browns talked to Cam? Is it even true? This is a weird one, to be honest, right? Because it seems by all reports that this happened, or the Browns at least considered it. But it also makes zero sense given what the Browns are doing. This is the first head scratcher of the offseason because Case Keenum was already signed to be a backup. Most NFL teams don't carry 3 quarterbacks on a roster. It wouldn't make sense that the Browns would, with as many tight ends that they're going to want to keep on the roster. You're going to have to sacrifice that third quarterback slot. So trying to bring in Cam Newton, I mean, like, to be a third stringer, essentially, just it doesn't make a ton of sense. Like, if we were playing franchise mode in Madden, yeah, it would make sense because you don't have to worry about things like team chemistry, how the locker room's going to handle this, and just, like, making sure that your number 1 overall pick's confidence stays up. But since we're not operating in the world of a video game and we are operating in the world of real life, it just doesn't make a ton of sense that they would have reportedly went after Cam Newton when they already paid Case Keenum $8 million to be the backup this year. And there's no doubt about that. So, again, weird. I don't know how true and how valid these reports are, but it does seem like it happened. My takeaway from it is that it shows that the Browns really have a sense of urgency for this year, and that sense of urgency is not going to be limited to their sense of protecting Baker Mayfield. So this is going to be on Baker Mayfield to succeed. Again, this is a swimmer sink season for him, and he is going to have to produce in order to get to his next contract if that's what he wants. This next question comes from Omar Shahed, who says, would you rather the Browns sign Everson, Griffin, or Clay Matthews? I would say Clay Matthews, and here's why. I don't think he's going to be as much as a help from an edge rusher perspective. I don't think he's going to be that much better than like an Adrian Claiborne would be at this part of his career. But I do think Clay Matthews does add some value in where you can kind of play him in some fringe situations as a stand-up linebacker. He won't necessarily be a every down linebacker, but you can put him in a stand-up position every once in a while because that's what he's done his whole career. He's kind of a 3-4 edge guy, so he can play outside linebacker technically. So you can put him out there and help fill some of the veteran gap and help fill that experience gap that this team has in the linebacking core. Again, with it looks like Jacob Phillips and Mack Wilson, a first and second year player, are going to be the core of that, with maybe BJ Goodson to throw in there, which isn't really a great option. So that's what I would lean towards because I feel like Clay Matthews can help fill a different role as well as add some depth in the edge rushing situation. Now, as a complete replacement for Olivier Vernon, I don't think either guys are that, in my opinion. I think you need to get somebody like Ngakoue. You need to get somebody like Clowney in order to replace Vernon. But if we're just talking about signing a guy for extra depth, I would go with Clay Matthews. The next question comes from SSJ Swift, who says, what do you think Baker's minimum requirements are to get his 5th-year option? I think whatever Baker does, he's going to have at least 15 more touchdowns than interceptions because again, if he throws a ton of touchdowns, some of the interceptions can be excusable. But if he only throws, 22 touchdowns and he's throwing 20 interceptions, and it just becomes he becomes a thorn in the side to the offense rather than somebody who can help it develop. Yardage-wise, I don't think that's as important. He's always going to be around that He's always going to be around that like 4,000-yard mark, upper 3,000s there. And I think the biggest requirement for Baker Mayfield in order to keep his job is that he's going to have to be a part of this team and a part of why they win. And this team's obviously, if that's going to be the case, he's going to have to win because that's what it is. That's what the Browns' main goal is now. And I know it sounds silly, but for so many years, this franchise's main goal hasn't been to win. But this year, like no other year, quite honestly, since 2008, and that was a huge failure, is this team's objective to clearly just win at all costs. And that's what they have to do the next 2 years, 3 years, before everybody gets locked up in these long-term deals. The goal is to win, and Baker Mayfield has to make sure that goal happens. And if he doesn't, they will find somebody else. The next question comes from RTR12, who says, would you consider getting bounced in the wild card as a 7th seed a successful season for the Browns? It's a good enough season in that nobody has to get fired, but it's not successful. A successful season for the Browns is bare minimum, a playoff win, not getting bounced as a wild card in the 7th seed and losing by 10 points to either Baltimore or Kansas City. That's not a successful season in my book. That's a decent season, but not a successful season. This team is much better than a 7th seed getting bounced in the first round. They should be much better than a 7th seed getting bounced in the first round. So that would be a little bit of a disappointment. But again, this team hasn't made the playoffs in how many years, so I couldn't be that disappointed with the playoff appearance. It's just, I'm not going to set the bar so low that if they get bounced as a 7th seed in a wild card, that I'm going to be excited about that. The next question comes from CrossX Gaming, who says, who is a player you would like to see the Browns pursue, whether it be via trade or free agency, signing to remain to filling holes in the roster? I've talked at length about Jamal Adams and Jadeveon Clowney. Obviously, I think those two could be huge helps, but if we're just talking about guys that are more attainable, Mike Daniels is going to be available again, and I think Mike Daniels can add some veteran depth to the defensive line. He can really help fill in that gap and give Larry Ogunjobi more of a defined role that I think he'll be spectacular in, rather than him having to be an every down guy. I think Mike Daniels is a guy that you want to get. He's not going to be Mike Daniels in Green Bay anymore. That's not who he is. But he does have an opportunity to kind of help fill in the role there with a Andrew Billings, with a Sheldon Richardson, with a Larry Ogunjobi. And I think with those 4 guys all together, you can figure out a pretty decent interior defensive line rotation that's going to be able to at least hold up. The next question comes from Evo B, who says, let's say Chubb and Hunt both have a season you expect from them. Chubb competing for the rushing title, Hunt being that dual threat that he was with the Chiefs. How would you feel if the Browns signed Hunt to a long-term deal and then traded Chubb for a day 2 pick after the season? I get it, right? Because Chubb's going to be expensive whenever he comes up because he's one of the best running backs in the NFL. Now, he doesn't get the same hype a guy like Saquon Barkley does, and that might work out in the Browns' favor because maybe he doesn't demand as much money, because usually when a running back gets paid, it's only one running back that's available to get paid that gets paid. So I can see in a world where Chubb will be too expensive, but Hunt might be affordable for the Browns, and they're both star-level running backs, so if you keep Hunt, lose Chubb, at least you can get a draft pick for Chubb if you get rid of him. Sure. Right? That wouldn't be the worst solution because you still got Kareem Hunt, right? The worst solution is losing both of them because you don't want to pay both of them. So, yeah, I can see it happening. Would I be excited or happy about it? No. Like losing Nick Chubb for a 2nd-round pick or a day 2 pick just doesn't sit right with me. This guy is somebody who is worth more than just what you got in the draft for him. He was a 2nd-round pick originally. This guy should be worth a 1st-round pick if you're going to deal him and then some, but I understand running backs aren't going to have that kind of trade value. So if that's the case and you're not really going to get enough in return for Nick Chubb, you might as well let him run out the contract and see if you can have a franchise tag situation and kind of hang on to this Hunt Chubb situation as long as you can. This next question comes from CKB Highlights, who says, what do you think Donovan Peoples Jones' ceiling is for his career? He has a high ceiling. He does have some focus drops. He actually reminds me of a little bit less polished version of Stephon Diggs. I think that would be his ceiling if he were to hit it, because this is somebody who can be a deep threat, can run some tremendous routes, is a spectacular athlete, has huge hands, can make the spectacular catch. Almost reminds you of Braylon Edwards in a way, except for he just didn't have the opportunities to really shine in Michigan with his ability to make some spectacular catch. And he also reminds you in Braylon Edwards of a way of his inability to make some just routine catches at times. So I would say he's kind of reminds me, and people have a negative connotation on Braylon Edwards, but there were a few years here in Cleveland and in New York where Braylon Edwards was a legitimate top 15 wide receiver in the NFL. So I think that's his ceiling, kind of a combination between Stephon Diggs and Braylon Edwards is where I see Donovan Peoples Jones ceiling if he is to develop appropriately in his career. This next question is from Simran Johnson, who says, if players start coming down with CV-19 during camp, do you think the NFL season will start on time, be delayed, or play at all? Or would you maybe continue the season and quarantine them until they can rejoin them in the season? Well, I'll tell you one thing, right? The opportunity and the time for the NFL to start on time and be in a bubble has gone, because the problem with being in a bubble for the NFL that exists for them but not for basketball is that basketball can decide a month beforehand that they're going to be in a bubble, and there are facilities that already exist in place in order to kind of compensate for that. For the NFL, that's not the same situation that they're in. The NFL really doesn't have an area like maybe you can go to Indianapolis's sports complex where they have all those football fields, but there's really nowhere where you have, one, the amount of space available, two, the amount of football, NFL level football field facilities available to play the 12 games at 1 o'clock that are going to be required for the NFL to play. And then you don't have somewhere that has those things and also the hotel capacity to hold every single NFL player in there. And remember, you have to adhere to some social distancing guidelines if you're going to do this whole bubble thing. So people can't just be room to room and 3 roommates up. You have to have them pretty much like separated by rooms, separated by hotels, separated by all of these things. And no one place, in my opinion, has those things all together. It might be in Arlington with what the Dallas Cowboys have, but even then, I think it's insufficient. So if the NFL decides to go into a bubble, I'm just going to let people know that's going to be a 3-4 month delay, because they have to build some of these facilities in order for them to exist, because they just currently don't exist right now. And I think that's why the NFL has been so resistant to say that they're going to go into a bubble, and why they've been pushing forward like they're just going to have these games under pretty normal circumstances. I know they banned fans from the lower bowls, they shortened the preseason, but it seems like they're still going to have regular travel. They're still going to have games in home stadiums. So it's going to be completely interesting. Now, as far as a delay, I would expect a delay too here. I think camp's probably going to be delayed by a couple weeks. I don't think it's going to start on time at the end of July as it's currently scheduled. I do think that there are going to be some hang-ups with the NFLPA and the NFL that it's going to delay camp for a little bit. And as far as anything like a stoppage in the middle of the season, I can't tell you if that's going to happen, because I'm not a infectious disease expert to tell you if this is likely or not. But, all things are possible in 2020. So it's going to be interesting to see how the season carries out, because there are going to be a lot of circumstances hitting it. And I don't know if I think the NFL's current plan, which is just go ahead as usual as much as possible, is necessarily a great plan. The next question comes from Giants Nation, who says, what's up, Quincy? Just got out of work. I have an interesting question. If Baker Mayfield wins at least one Super Bowl, will Cleveland love him equal or more than LeBron? I wondered this. I thought I'd ask a person from Cleveland. In my opinion, it'd take a lot more than one Super Bowl to outdo what LeBron did as far as what he means to a lot of people, myself included. Somebody who came back, won one of the most difficult and memorable championships of this millennium, and really lived up to his promise, and also did a lot of great things within the community. So I think that's really hard to live up to if you're Baker Mayfield just with one championship. Now, if Baker Mayfield does something crazy like lead the Browns on a dynasty run and they get 3 in a row, yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it. If he gets 2, that'll do it. But the one, if you compare championship to championship, it'd be hard. It'd be extremely difficult for the Browns to do something as spectacular, as underdogish, that's not even a word, I just made that up, but as hard as what LeBron did, because the Browns roster just, quite frankly, is not an underdog roster. They live up to expectations. But 2, then you start to get in that conversation. The next question, this has been the question of the week, is from Mike Burkholder, who says, how short of a leash is Baker on? Obviously, I want him to succeed and truly believe he'll bounce back. Okay, so I've had to hear about this Baker Mayfield short leash thing all week, and here's the thing that bugs me about the whole conversation, right? It's not that it exists, it's how these things get reported. And I complain about this stuff on a regular basis because I think it's genuinely irresponsible how some places go about doing this. And that is, how did this whole short leash conversation start? Where did this quote unquote report start from? Well, it started on ESPN when Mike Tannenbaum, who's never been associated with the Cleveland Browns ever, he was, I believe, the general manager of the Jets for a long time. And I believe he might have worked in Minnesota, so he might know Kevin Stefanski from there. Said that, if he were Kevin Stefanski, he would have Baker Mayfield on a short leash, definitely. That's what Mike Tannenbaum said in a kind of talking head segment on ESPN. That somehow turned to a bunch of websites that cover the Browns, quite frankly, saying that Mike Tannenbaum is reporting that Kevin Stefanski has Baker Mayfield on a short leash, and then combining that with speculative reports that Cam Newton was looking to get signed by the Browns. And it's just, something doesn't make sense here on one hand, because again, Case Keenum was signed to play the backup position for $8 million. No NFL team who pays that much for a backup is going to keep a third stringer. Just look around the league. That's not the situation any NFL roster is in. And then when you talk about the short leash thing, one, look at the source. It came from nowhere. It wasn't from inside the building. It was from somebody who thinks he knows somebody inside the building. That's not a report. So is Baker Mayfield on a short leash? I don't think so. I think he's on a leash, most definitely. I think he has to win, most definitely. I think he has to have a bounce back, most definitely, because he can't throw a ton of interceptions in this offense with how much they're going to be running the ball. But a short leash, like getting benched after 2 games, short leash, like that's what a short leash is, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Baker Mayfield's going to at least have 9 games to prove that he stinks before he gets benched for Case Keenum or they move on to a different option. So that's why I think of the short leash narrative, and it's just putting a new name. It's just putting a new name on something that we all knew. We knew Baker Mayfield couldn't come out this season and stink and still continue to hold on to the starting job. We knew that was the case. So I don't think this is anything new. The whole short leash thing makes it seem a lot worse than it actually is. And honestly, it's not even a genuine actual report. But that's just my thoughts on the whole short leash conversation that's been going on about Baker Mayfield and the Browns as of the last week. But that's it for this week's Q&A. Thank you guys for asking these questions. Again, if you want to ask a question to get on the show, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you can be notified when I put up the questions tab. I usually put it up on a Thursday at 7:30 in the morning. So keep your eyes peeled on your community tab when that happens. Also, you can ask questions normally on Twitter. I didn't take any questions from Twitter this week because I had so many on YouTube. But when I do ask questions on Twitter, you can follow me at QnC. That's where you get the Twitter questions from. But again, guys, thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.